Hello everyone, this is Ashley with Quest and welcome to Quest Experience Week. Today is JD Edwards Day and our session is Efficiency Gains Managing Sales Order Work Order Relationships. UX1 and Orchestrations can ease the pain of exceptions with Brian Rose and Bernadette Durham with Terillium. A few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. All attendee lines are in mute and will stay in mute throughout the session. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the question drop-down box located on your GoToWebinar panel. We will be answering questions at the end of the session. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Quest Content Library. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Bernadette, who will kick things off.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining us. Really glad to have you join us today. I'm actually super excited about this session. I always love presenting at any type of conference anyway, but this one is extra cool because it's the first time that I have gotten to co-present with Brian Rose. We are colleagues at Terillium. I'm a solution architect on the distribution side of the business, and Brian is a solution architect on the manufacturing side. And I was kind of laughing getting ready this morning because I'm always let's tell people how they can make the system work better for the business. I'm Miss Process. And Brian has become very much about let's leverage the tools. And when we were talking through the session for today, this became very much a meeting of the minds, and how do we make the tools meet the process and work for the business? This is probably the presentation that I am most excited about of any that I have done at any conference in the last 3 or 4 years. So thanks for joining us. I am super stoked about this one. So we're talking about the relationships between sales orders and work orders specifically, but I want to make it really clear that the concepts and the tools that we're talking about can apply to pretty much any transactional situation where you've got two orders or two sides to a transaction in the system. It doesn't matter functionally where in the system you are. It doesn't matter what type of documents they are. The same concepts and the same tools would work irrespective. So we're in distribution and manufacturing today, but this could work just as easily between manufacturing and finance, or between two pieces of a finance process. So we're going to be focusing on using orchestrations and a little bit of using UX1 tools to look at how we can take some of the pain out of managing exceptions that occur when we're running into issues with producing work orders to meet the requested dates on sales orders. And I'll talk in a minute about what some of those issues are, but also about how we can put some necessary controls in on the sales order side so that we don't actually shoot ourselves in the foot when we're trying to provide customer service and actually make things more difficult for manufacturing to produce as we need them to. So first of all, introductions. I'm listed as Bernie Durham. Honestly, half the time I never know what my name is. I got married. You can still contact me at bdurham@terillium.com. It does still work. These days I am Bernie Dannemiller. And I've been working with JD Edwards for going on 23 years now. It just makes me an old fart. I started out in industry as a business analyst and then got into consulting almost 15 years ago. And spent the majority of that time as an implementation consultant, and for the last 5 years or so have been working as a solution architect, which pretty much means that I fill whatever role nobody else is filling at the moment. But a lot of what that role entails is working with companies to identify areas where their processes and their software are not fully meeting the business needs. So a lot of what I'm doing is working with companies to identify opportunities for incremental improvements. And UX1 tools and orchestrations have been absolutely enormous for giving us tools to be able to meet some of those business needs without enhancements, and also with the ability to actually remove some of the enhancements and get back to a vanilla footprint. So that's a large part of what I do. I also head up the distribution team at Terillium. And I'm going to shut up for a minute and let Brian introduce himself.
Thank you, Bernie. Hey guys, Brian Rose. I'm a newbie to JD Edwards compared to Bernie. She's been doing it forever. 10 years JD Edwards, 10 years with Terillium. I grew up in a supply chain company, so I've been doing supply chain all of my life. My role is very similar to what Bernie spoke about. It's just more with a manufacturing twinge to it. So understanding how we can automate and process improve and standardize different organizations, leveraging whether it's process improvement or like Bernie talked about, the tools. So I've been very fortunate to leverage Orchestrator for a long time. I think I started using it back in 2014, 2015 when it first came out. So it has come a long way from where it was to begin with, which is great. And also we see more and more people, leveraging it and seeing business use for it. So looking forward to today, and I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Bernie.
Cool, thank you, Brian. Brian sounds a little bit funny because he is sitting in a lounge at an airport right now and dealing with a little bit of background noise. So apologies if we get some background noise there. All right, so before we jump into the actual exception management of this, I wanted to talk just for a couple of minutes about how important dates are when we're talking about, honestly, anything to do with managing sales orders and producing to fill them. One of the things that I consistently run across dealing with clients is misunderstandings about how sales order dates function. And I'm not going to get into a ton of detail. So if you do have questions about this, you can absolutely feel free to either ask questions and we'll hit them if we have time at the end, or email me, and I'd be very, very happy to follow up with you about this. But when we put an order in the system tries to drive everything from the requested delivery date. And a lot of times folks don't understand that when we enter the requested date, the system does treat that as the date that the customer is requesting the product gets delivered to them. And if you don't have anything set up that is driving transit days in the system, either through preferences or through transportation, it doesn't necessarily behave like a delivery date, so you don't have to treat it like a delivery date, but that is what the system is doing. So there are more dates on the order, but the ones that we're really caring about most of the time are, when is the customer requesting it? When do we need to pick it in order to ship it on time? So then my promise ship, when do I have to ship it in order to deliver it to the customer on time? And if you don't have any dates set up in the system, then whatever the customer requests for delivery, as long as it's not a date in the past, the system is going to default all of these days to be the same. If you're actually producing product, or if you're needing to actually purchase product or move it in order to fill those orders, the system's going to use that scheduled pick date in order to drive when that product needs to be available to actually be physically picked to fill the order. So if you're running MRP, if you're doing any kind of planning, or if you're producing work orders, that scheduled pick date is the critical one for when the system thinks that you need to have that product physically sitting there in a condition that you can pick it and start packing it to be able to ship it. And I'm going to clip through these slides pretty quickly. I'm alluding in here to the fact that you can use preferences, advanced preferences, or you can use the setup in transportation routes to manage how the system will apply date calculations to back schedule to calculate into these dates. I'm not going to get into those in this session. There is an appendix on the back end of the slide deck that goes into a little bit of detail, not a ton. So again, if you have questions about these, please ask questions and I'd be happy to follow up with you. But the basic way that the system calculates is it's a back schedule. The customer is going to give you a requested date that they would like to take delivery of the material. And what the system will do is it'll start calculating from that date. It'll start using that as the promised delivery date. Then it'll look to see through either preferences or transportation route if there are any transit days that apply to actually get the product after you ship it to that customer. And it'll back those days out to back schedule to calculate when do I need to ship it in order to get it to the customer. And then it'll back schedule again. It'll look for either lead days or what are called order preparation days to see if you have specified that you need a certain amount of time to actually get that product either through quality or packed or something else that you have to do within the warehouse between having it picked and actually having it ready to ship. And so what the system does is it's back scheduling, and as long as that scheduled pick date is not prior to today's date, the system will actually let you place that order. Which, if you think about the situation when you're actually going to need to produce it, could be a bit of a problem. If you're going to be entering a sales order that's going to create a W line type for a work order, you've also got to have time to actually produce the material. And what the system will do is it will look to see if there's a lead time set up for the item branch that the line is created for. And if it can't produce in time, you'll get a warning, not an error. The system will assume that if you get a warning and you decide to go ahead and place the order anyway, that you know what you're doing, and you're either going to be able to suck it up and produce it today, or you're going to be able to suck it up somewhere in that picking, shipping, delivery process in order to get it to the customer on time. So what I want to lead with is the fact that while we are talking about how to manage exceptions, there is also kind of a need to recognize that you should have a good date process on the front end of this, because if you start building a process over an inherently bad setup, you're gonna end up making the software look like everything is being handled as an exception. When we're talking about making exception handling easier, that doesn't mean that we're trying to have it so that the entire business process is being handled like everything needs to be an exception. Even when everything is going great, even when your customer service folks and your customers are placing orders and paying attention to what your lead times are, you can still end up with plenty of different scenarios that are going to cause you to run into situations that make it challenging or impossible to actually produce on time. And when I saw this picture, I kind of laughed, because there isn't anybody that's dealing with supply chain right now that doesn't look at that picture and know exactly where I'm going with it. Practically everybody that is dealing with distribution and manufacturing has dealt with some level of supply chain just crud in the last 18 months. And that has compounded the normal things that can cause us to have to deal with work order oopses. We're used to dealing with the fact that we'll have material shortages because the supplier either short ships or they send us product that has quality issues, so we're short on raw materials. we'll have that machine that was running just fine, and all of a sudden we have unexpected downtime. But going through COVID, you know, we've also had short staffing. We've had to have closures. We've had to completely deal with running out of raw materials. So what has in the past just been an exception basis has made it completely apparent how painful it is trying to deal with those exceptions, especially in a manufacturing environment. So what we're looking at today is how can we better manage those? How can we provide visibility on the sales order side when we do run into those oopses on the work order side? And also, how can we put better controls in place on the sales order side to protect us from actually making bad decisions? So like I already said, the system doesn't force us to pay attention to lead times and order entry. We need a mechanism, if we do that, to recognize as we're updating our work order that we cannot meet the time that was requested. If we, for any reason, need to change the expected completion date on the work order, it doesn't automatically update back to the related date on the sales order line. Usually that involves somebody in manufacturing either picking up the phone, walking across the street, sending an email, and hoping that somebody on the customer service side actually reads that message. Or even worse, they forget to do it. You know, they change the work order, and the next thing you know, somebody in customer service is screaming because why isn't my stuff ready to ship? And whoever it was that updated the work order completely forgot to actually call customer service and let them know we can't meet your date and we're pushing out the work order. So we're looking for something that will actually take the memory piece and the not getting 300 emails behind factor out from communicating the update to the customer. And something that can actually take the manual work out of executing that update to the sales order. And then lastly, one of the pieces that's always bothered me about the sales order work order process is best practice tells us that there is a point at which we should no longer be making changes to a sales order. If I've got a stocked product, I know that at the point that I generate a pick ticket out to the warehouse, I really should not be making changes to that sales order. I've released it to the warehouse. I should consider it to be in the shipping process. From the work order side, the last point at which I can get a standard update from JD Edwards is when the parts list and routing is attached. And that doesn't necessarily reflect when the actual manufacturing process is started. And so something I have wanted for a long time is a way to get an update back to the sales order when the first action of that work order production starts. And that is something that we can manage through an orchestration so that I can now get an update, a status update back to the sales order that tells me when that process starts. So Brian is sitting over there chomping his teeth because I'm talking for too long. Here's what we're going to show you. The status codes at the top are what I would typically expect to see in a really simple work order process on a sales order, a W line type. I enter my order, and this is my next status. I enter my order, my work order gets completed. I may sometimes have an interim status there if I see the work order and parts list get attached. And then my pick ticket gets generated. What we're going to show you today is what it looks like if I can see when a date change suggestion gets made because the work order completion date gets changed. We're going to see that pushing data back to the sales order and notifying the customer service originator that they need to look at it and make a decision whether the customer is going to be okay with that date change. We're going to see another status change when that date change gets accepted and we automate the update to the sales order to say, okay, we can live with that. Those are going to be our new dates on our sales order. And we're also going to show you how we can put a control in place so that when work order production actually starts, we get a status that we can now use in sales order entry to prevent any additional changes on that sales order line, so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and ask for changes that we can no longer accommodate. So I'm going to hop over into JD Edwards, and I'm going to enter a sales order that's going to generate a W line type. And because I'm a good customer service user, I'm going to give my manufacturing team plenty of time to produce this product. And so you'll see that I do have dates set up here that are back scheduling for me. So I'm requesting delivery on 12/23. That is then back scheduling to tell me that I have to schedule it 2 days earlier. I've got 2 days of transit time, and it's telling me that I need to pick it on the 19th. That is because I've got 2 days of warehouse setup time built in. And so I actually need to have this available to pick on the 19th. So I'm going to go ahead and place that. Why do you not like that? Well, this is all kinds of fun because I did this earlier and it worked just fine.
Bernie, I think the sales order is 154678.
Thank you.
Sure.
If I could type, I don't know how many times I have said this in the last 2 days. If I could type, I'd actually be dangerous. All right, so you see that my sales order was created at next status 5:30. I have my work order number here. And so imagine here that a little bit of time passes and this gets over to manufacturing and they're planning the work order. And Brian, who is my manufacturing team, is like, all right, well, ordinarily that would be absolutely fine. But in this instance, we can't meet that scheduled pick date. We actually can't produce that until December 31st. That's the earliest that we can actually ship this. And so on the warehouse side, what Brian is going to be doing is he is updating the work order to reflect that they can't produce until December 31st. And when I turn this over to Brian, he's going to show you the orchestration piece of this and what is actually driving the update that's coming back. So first of all, before I even refresh this, you see I've got a notification up at the top of the screen. I'm going to refresh this, and what you're going to see is I've got a status change pushed back to my sales order. So I see 5:33. That is my indication from customer service side that the work order has been updated to say I cannot meet the date that you requested. Now, we don't want to start changing the sales order dates until customer service has actually talked to the customer. So what we're doing is we're updating that, that new date that manufacturing is telling us they can do. We're putting that to the user reserved date field, and that orchestration, as well as updating my status on my sales order, putting that new work order date that we can do into the user reserved date field, it's also sending me a notification telling me as the order originator that the date has been updated and it affects this sales order. Now, if I didn't have the sales order open right now, I could launch directly from this notification to come into here, and it's going to bring me in to work directly with that sales order. I've also set up a watch list. So if I refresh this real quick, because people take vacations, It may be that the person that originated the order, they may have left for the day, or they may be on vacation when this date change gets notified. So you may also want to have something that somebody else is able to keep an eye on date change requests that are coming through and make sure that they're actually all getting managed. So if I come back into this date change here, if I take a look at this, and either I know that we're in a manufacturing crunch and the customer is going to be okay with this, or I talk to the customer and the customer gives me the thumbs up, what I can do here is I've got a form extension with an orchestration behind it that when I select this line, when I highlight this line and I click my date change, it's going to grab the date from the user reserved date field. It's going to make that my new scheduled pick date so that it now matches the expected completion date on the work order. And you're also going to see that my promised ship date and my promised delivery date, they're also going to get my lead days and my transit days applied to them. You're also going to see that my next status is going to update so that I can tell that this went from 5:33, meaning I needed to be reviewed, to going to a 5:34, meaning now I've actually been executed and I've been changed. So you saw it flashed up a little, submitted, and now if I click find, I've disappeared. Now if I look at my records at 5:34, now you can see my scheduled pick date got updated to that 12/31 date, and my promised ship and my promised delivery date are reflecting my 2 days for setup and my 2 days for transit, and my next status got updated. I've still got visibility to my customer's original requested date. I can see in the ledger that each one of those steps happened. And I do still have the ability, if I want to work with manufacturing and figure out if there's something that we can do to kind of find a halfway happy. I'm not locked into having to accept the date that came from manufacturing. I've still got the capacity to do all of the normal things that I would on the sales order, including actually canceling that line. And then the last thing before I hand this over to Brian would be when we actually get to the point where we start production on this work order. This is the point where normally it's completely invisible to me when manufacturing actually starts. So I don't have anything from the sales order side to tell me, hands off, do not touch this. They're actually producing it at this point. So Brian is going to do an issue as if he is actually starting production on the work order. Whoop. Let me go back to my original. Yep, and there we go. And when he did that first transaction on the work order, as if he was actually starting production, another orchestration updated the status on my. I stopped sharing. Another orchestration updated the sales order, so now I could actually use that status as a processing option control in sales order entry to prevent me from being able to make any changes after we had started production. All right, so at that point, I'm going to hand this over to Brian, and now he's going to actually walk through what that orchestration piece of this looks like that is actually driving those updates to the sales order.
Great, thank you, Bernie. And hopefully you guys can hear me better now. Like Bernie said, I'm in an airport, so try my best to keep the audio down in the background. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so like Bernie spoke about, and the goal of the next 20 minutes or so is to give you background of, how all those functions and features were running in the background from an orchestration perspective. How do we create the service request? How do we attach them to specific steps or clicks or buttons? What are some of the key components around Orchestrator? So this is an example here of that order number that Bernie came in and created. So when I came into my manufacturing work order, if I were to jump in, you'll notice I can come in, make any changes that I want, and I've added this little button here, which says Update Sales Order Date. So what that means is it allows me to make changes to the requested date, maybe do some simulations, look to see if I change to this date, will it alleviate my shortages or give me the capacity that I need? And once I've firmed that up and I feel like my date is where it should be, I can run that update. So that update is leveraging a form extension with an orchestration built behind it. So to give you some understanding of what that orchestration looks like, I'm going to jump into Orchestrator Studio. And this is the orchestration. And the great thing about Orchestrator as a whole is it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So for this specific use case, we had to, one, know which update or which sales order we're updating, which line possibly on that sales order, and then we had to go and update two specific status codes, so our last status and our next status, and then we also wanted to update that user reserved field. So we exposed that field with a form extension, and now that allowed us to create or add different values inside of that step. So you can see in here, this is just a two-step orchestration. The first one is me taking the values from my work order and passing those into my sales order detail, updating that status, updating that date, and then also sending that notification. So the bell that Bernie saw inside of JDE that popped up and said, hey, there was a change made, that is built out inside of this orchestration. So this service request, what's great about these is you can come in and create them manually if you want. So if you know exactly all the clicks or all the functions, but more times than not, what we see people leveraging is a tool called the process recorder. Okay, so process recorder in JDE, think of it like a macro in Excel, to where you click start, you do all the processes of everything that you want to do, you click stop, and it captures every single click, from me querying on a sales order to going to the detail line to updating the status. So if I jump over here to JDE, what we're going to do is kind of show from start to finish how you could build out this type of orchestration, from creating the service request to attaching a notification and building that out. So let me jump back here into JDE. And I'm going to go into my sales orders. Okay, so here is an example of a sales order that came in, like Bernie said, it was a 520 status, 530 next status. And for the orchestration update, I want the ability to go in and update some key specific values. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just click all records. Let's bring up some more data. Up here in the top, and this is in any application you go into in JDE, if you click in the top right, you're going to get this little record or process button. So if you click that, I'm going to go ahead and start it. And then all you're doing is clicking through all the steps you would normally do when you want to make this change. So I'm going through, I'm saving through my header. I'm then coming in here and saying, okay, I want to first update my user reserve field to a date. I'm going to put in this 12/31/2021. And then also I want to update my last status to 530 and my next status to 533. Okay, click OK, and then stop. So all of the steps that I just went through, from querying the sales order to saving through the header to updating the sales order line, was captured in a service request. So we'll just call this service request. I'm going to save this. All right, so now that I've created that service request, I can jump into the Orchestrator Studio, And I'm just going to go ahead and log in and log out. And each of those service requests are, if you're going through an application, it's going to build out a form request. So a form request in Orchestrator is me clicking through any type of view edit form. Okay, so if I come in and I look up request, it's not liking my, can just find it. Let me try real quick. Didn't like my search. Okay. So it's not liking my search. Let's build it out this way. So let's start from the top at the orchestration. Okay. So once again, this built out my service request or form request, but we still need to associate that to an orchestration to actually be able to leverage it inside of some type of form request. Okay. So to do that, I can come in here and click new. I'm going to call this quest form request, quest form sales order update. And then I can go ahead and determine which different components do I want to build out inside of this orchestration. So in this example, once again, I'm going to be leveraging a form request. So I would click the add button. See if I like my search in here. Here we go. So now I have my service request. And if I click save, and let's go ahead and jump into this once again to show you all of the steps that are being captured when leveraging that process recording. So it's showing all of the forms that I'm walking through. It's showing all the values that I'm passing. So as you get comfortable with the orchestrator, you'll kind of realize once you run through a process recording, how you can clean up some of the inputs and outputs. So a great example is I'm going to go ahead and clean up the default value for order because I'm always going to be passing in something new. When I query down to a specific order, I don't need to pass anything, so I'll just default that to a 1. Right, I can pass through, I come in here, and this is where I say, okay, which row do I want to update? If I were doing a sales order that had multiple lines, I could pass in a specific row that I wanted to update. Since this was a single line sales order, I could just default this to a 1. I want to pass my date. And then for this specific update, I'm always going to be passing in 530, 533. So instead of making the orchestration more complex than it has to be, I would just say, you know what? I don't need to pass in any inputs here. I'm always going to go to 530, 533. So what this gets me to is now I really only need to pass 2 key values to determine or make that specific update. I need to pass in my order number, which is my sales order, and I need to pass in the date I want to update that line to. The status changes, it knows automatically in the background what it should be defaulted to. So once I've done that, I click save, I back out, and now it's going to say, like I said, these are the 2 inputs that I need to pass. I need to pass order number, I need to pass date. And the very simple way to add these to your inputs from an orchestration perspective is you can click this little button up here, which is add inputs to orchestration. So if I click that and then auto map, it will automatically create this mapping for me. It's where I know where I need to pass my specific values to. So from the process of me creating the form request to process recorder to coming in and generating the orchestration, it's a 5-10 minute task. And that's what's so incredible about Orchestrator as a whole, is you can build up so many different iterations of a specific function or business case with very little time. And you can apply these to any type of click inside of JD Edwards. So once I've gone, I've said, you know what, I've built this out the way that I want it. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And so for me to associate this to a specific step or click or button inside of JDE, that's leveraging that form request functionality that I was talking about. So let me jump back in here to JD Edwards. Let's go ahead and log in, log out. Okay. So let's go ahead and just for example purposes, I will grab this work order. And this is that button, right, which is doing all of that orchestration run in the background. To go ahead and look at kind of the guts of what that's doing, I would come over here and click that form extension. And in here, I can do all different types of things. So I can add a button. I can go into my associate orchestrations. So to just give you an example of how you could add a button and associate that orchestration behind it, I would click the OK here, drag it to where I want it. Let's just call this Quest. Once I've associated this button, I can now click and determine what orchestration do I want to kick off when I click this button. Okay, so what I would do is click into this control button, and what's awesome about this is it doesn't just have to be me clicking a button. It could be when I click the OK. It could be after I put in a description or after I exit a control. So every single field inside of JDE you can use as a trigger. You can pass values back. So if you want to go grab something in an orchestration and pass it back into the class, all that can be done when you click in or out or go to a visual assist. So, you know, everyone always talks about the clicking of the button and how that can, you know, process different orchestrations, which once again is a great tool, but also you can have it be done if you click into a field or click out of a field, which I think is really powerful. So we're going to go ahead and say, I'm going to take this, say when I click on this button, I now determine what orchestration do I want to run when I do that. So you can see I have my orchestration here. And then I determine which values from this form do I want to pass, right? So I want to pass my requested date from this field. So this is the date that I'm going to be passing up to my user reserved field. And then my sales order number. Now, if this was a specific orchestration to where maybe sales order number wasn't in the application or there was a value that's not in the view that you need, you could leverage a data request to pull that information and use it. But for today's purposes, what's great is inside of additional system info, it will give us our sales order number. So I can also say I want to map the current sales order number and the current date in a specific version when I run this orchestration. Okay, so just like that, I have now associated to a button an orchestration to where when I click on it, it's going to pull the date from my requested date in the work order, update the user reserved field based on the sales order that is associated to it. So once again, when we think of this from a timing perspective and a use case perspective, we can build something like this out in minutes, not hours. Normally, what takes the bulk of the time when people are building orchestrations is determining all the use cases or where it makes the most sense to leverage them. Building them out is the easy part. And this, once again, is an example of a very simplistic orchestration. There's situations where we have some that have 10, 15 components, and those can run through different rules and different calculations. But for this, we're just trying to do a status update and also update a specific date on an order. Now, the other key orchestration that I ran for Bernie was when I did the issues. So I'm going to go over here and pull up a work order. So in this example, you're going to see this is more me running something when I were to click on a value.
So example, you don't see a button in here, you don't see anything that would assume or give you the thought that there's an orchestration associated to it. But when I click this OK button, it's going to say, hey, if there is an issue that is done and it's associated to a specific sales order, go in and update that sales order. So by leveraging that form extension again, and you'll notice in here, if I come in and look at my associate orchestrations, I have this orchestration that runs. And if I come in and look at it, you'll see when I click the OK button, I want to automatically run this orchestration, which is production started. I want to pass my work order number, which is going to then give me my sales order number that is associated to it, and update that specific sales order. Okay, so this is doing that orchestration once again based on a click of the OK button versus a click of something like the button that is added to the screen. Now, from a background perspective or what that function is actually doing, if I jump back over here to my orchestration, here is the production started. So this is a great example of a form that doesn't have that sales order number, but I need to still go and update a sales order. So the first step of this orchestration is me going and finding that sales order number. So I can come in and look up my work order number in the 4801 and pull back what sales order is associated to it. So from that point, now I know which line do I want to go in and update for that specific sales order. So I pass in my sales order number into my order number field. It goes through all the steps from updating my statuses, updating my rows, just like the previous orchestration did. So this is that example of me grabbing data before I run through my form request versus the previous example where everything that I needed was in that individual click. So once again, from a background orchestration perspective, this is a very, very powerful tool. There's all different types of use cases that it can be leveraged for. For today's example, it was pretty simplistic of updating a couple of fields, but from a power of not having an end user have to do it, it adds a ton of automation. So that's kind of talking through the guts of how this orchestration works and runs. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Bernie to close this out and then answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you, Brian. I always love how you make that sound so easy. For anybody that doesn't think that it's that easy, I kind of concur. I don't make it look as easy as Brian does. So kind of just wrapping this up a little bit, and then we'll get to questions. The PowerPoint that I'm using will get saved out to the session so that you can access it. If you're not able to get it, please feel free to email either me or Brian and we'll get it to you. It does have a couple of simple flow diagrams in here showing kind of the process that we went through and screenshots of what we showed you in JD Edwards. And what I wanted to finish out by talking about was the fact that the same general concepts can be used in some other situations, and I'm talking specifically on the distribution side now because that's my happy place. Some places that I have used and I'm planning to use the approaches that we've used today are with direct shipments. One of the things that I run across a lot are with direct shipments, things like we'll actually get the supplier invoice and we'll be charged freight from the supplier, and based on the freight that we're charged from the supplier, that will determine freight charges that need to be passed on to the customer. There isn't an automated way without using these kinds of tools to actually get that freight onto the sales order unless you have a standard freight calculation. So if you're either passing along the freight charge from the supplier, or if you're using that as the basis of your calculation, you can now use an orchestration to pick up that freight charge from the OD purchase order and use that to actually create the freight charge line on your sales order before you actually complete the update and send it on to invoicing. Transfers, I have run across all kinds of weird and wacky scenarios where people either want to receive the transfer before they complete the shipment on the ST, or they want to do something with receipt routing on the OT that updates the ST. So it's just another situation where you've got related sales order and purchase order, and you could use either UX1 tools to manage information between the two to give you visibility, or orchestrations to actually manage updates. One of the ones that has kind of plagued me for years is if you use the standard RMA process, when you receive the OM purchase order for returned product and you run the standard batch program, the R400502, I think it is, to update the credit order, there isn't capability to put the return into receipt routing and not update the credit order to issue credit to the customer until you actually complete return to stock. As soon as you receive it, even if it's going through inspection, as soon as you complete that receipt, even if you haven't put it back to stock, it'll update the credit order and say issue credit to the customer. Personally, I don't want to issue credit to the customer until we've inspected it and we actually know that it's okay and we're going to accept the return of it. So I would have capability to eliminate use of that batch program and wait until I actually put the inventory to stock and then use that return to stock now to trigger an orchestration to update the status on my credit order to actually trigger invoice to the customer. And those are just the ones that I thought of as I was putting the slide deck together. I'm sure there's probably some things I've run across with intercompany sales where you've got an SISK OK type situation. I know I've had funky requirements for markups on the intercompany piece of it where I could probably use something like this. And you know, that's kind of the thing with these kind of tools is you don't know that you need them until you actually need them. And this has given us a place to go where in the past we probably would have been going down the road of considering doing enhancements. So at that point, I'm going to look. I know we had at least one question come in. I'm going to turn my camera off so you don't see me looking at my other monitor and looking like a total moron here. All right, so the first question that came in, I'm not sure I'm going to have a good answer unless Brian does, at least not right off the bat. So does this affect commitment flags of configured items? In the past, we've had issues when the dates were changed on the sales order line. The commitments reverted from the work order back to the sales order, and only when we reran work order processing did the commitments revert back to the work order. I know that for both kits and for configured items that that basically your child items, the flag for commitments gets changed when the work order parts list gets run, and that then if you do edit the sales order line again, that it resets that commitment flag back to the sales order. And so I think what you're describing is actually what I would expect to happen. That if you edit the sales order, you typically would expect the commitment flag to update back on the sales order. So I think with the process as we were showing it today, there's kind of a timing situation ideally you would be identifying that you couldn't meet the sales order date before you were running the R31410, and so you wouldn't have actually updated your commitment flag at that point. You'd run across that issue if you'd already attached your parts list and routing, then subsequently you were identifying that you couldn't meet the date. I think that one possibility at that point that you could look at, if you're using transportation, you could possibly look at making a date update through a shipment rather than doing it through the sales order, and see if that maybe doesn't affect your commitments the same way as it does through the sales order. I'm not sure about that. But if you did make a change to the sales order after you had run the R31410, I would expect it to reset those commitment flags on the sales order. I think that is the system functioning the way it's intended. And if I'm misinterpreting that question, I'm not sure whether I'm not sure if the mics are open now to where you're able to jump in and clarify that. Brian, this one is probably one I need you to jump in on. The question is, can you run the orchestration over multiple rows in the grid, i.e. repeat for the grid? I want to say the answer is yes, but I am not the expert.
Yep. So in this situation, well, let's say it's the sales order update Bernie was talking or was showing, where she clicked the button and it automatically updated the user reserve date into the pick date. You could, if there was, let's say, 5 lines or 5 orders that had that situation to where the date was updated and you want to process them all at the same time, you could select all the lines and it would process them all.
Thank you. And then question, what tools and application release are most of these features in orchestration available on? Update 22 or earlier versions? I know definitely earlier than update 22.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of the stuff that we showed today, you should be getting probably in the 924s. You know, from adding something from a personal form, adding a button. Those are the later 924s, 925s is when you should get to them. You don't have to be on the current release that we were showing was 9252 was the environment that I was in. So definitely doesn't have to be 22.
Okay. That is all that I am seeing for questions right now. If you do still have questions, please drop them in. If you have questions and you want to send them to Brian or I or both of us, right now I've got our email information up on the screen. Like I say, I will make sure that the PowerPoint slides get posted on the Quest site along with the session, so you can access it there. If you would prefer to shoot one of us an email, we'll be happy to send it to you. And if you've got questions either about anything in today's session, or if you've just got more general questions about anything to do with JD Edwards and business situations that you are running into, you might have got the sense, me especially, I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff. I massively enjoy doing my job, and this is kind of my happy place, talking about things that can help make your business run better. So even if it's nothing to do with today's session and there's something that you would like to talk to, feel free to drop me an email and I would be happy to get on a call with you and talk through whatever you got going on. Aside from that, oh, hang on, might have one more. Can you, I think, kind of following on from the previous question about updating multiple lines, it was going into, can you update multiple orders?
Yep. So multiple lines, multiple orders. You can, so ultimately, once again, You can, if I pulled up a grid and it had, you know, three different orders, 10 different lines across all of those orders, you could more or less pick and choose which ones you wanted to update.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Be sure to check your email for a QXW survey and check out the Quest website for more QXW sessions. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.